Everybody, welcome to another episode of Jimmy Wolf Talks. We got Jeff Dunbrack as our special guest, and today we're going to do our three favorite albums of 1991. So this was a really important transition year from the 80s into the 90s, obviously, and a lot of underground alternative bands were getting a lot more attention, and mainstream rock was starting to get battered a little bit. But it was also this sort of golden center where everyone was able to do their own thing, which is really cool. So, yeah. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Jeff. Why don't you start? Maybe give a little summation of 1991 and let's see what your three favorite records.
91, good year.
Yeah.
Tough to pick three favorites. I don't think my three favorites are going to be much surprise to anybody that knows me for sure. We are talking before 1994, of course, before Oasis debuted. Anyways, we're going to just get right into this. Definitely, and it's my definite favorite from 91, Acton Baby.
Nice.
There's nothing... I can't say anything about this. We've already discussed this album at length. It's in my top. It's in my top five, probably of all time. Quite frankly, it's just perfect. There's no duds. It's kind of futuristic sounding. It sounds ahead of its time. It doesn't sound like anything that was coming out in 91. U2 were completely on their own path, and 90 and 91 sounded, even when you listen back to the big records of those times, they just sound so new and fresh. Although Use Your Illusion came out in 91 too, it sounds big. It just sounds like a bigger Guns N' Roses. I don't necessarily know whether it sounds fresh, but all the big genre-defining albums of that time are just, they still sound so vibrant to me. Acton Baby, no exception. 12 songs long, like that's a lot for a record too. And the songs weren't short. No 2.5 minute little ditties here. Like most of them are over 5 minutes long, I think. Definitely amongst their greatest work is in there. I mean, One, Mysterious Ways. I mean, they still get an awful lot of radio play just from this one record. I don't know if it was their biggest seller, but certainly, I used to be torn between the Joshua Tree and this one, and now I'm firmly on the Acton Baby side. So much so that I went to see them at the Sphere for a $5,000 weekend for one concert. So hated Vegas, loved the show. But even seeing them do it, 30 years later, was still just awe-inspiring to me, and the greatest. That was the best show I've ever seen. Anyways, Acton Baby, definite number one. The other two aren't really in any particular order, but I'm gonna throw a curveball at everyone. NWA. It has a very filthy title. Eiffel for Zagen, I believe, is how it's pronounced. This album would never, ever be in anyone else's top 10, I don't think. Because Straight Outta Compton was so genre-defining. And, the politics in the band were so bad at this time that, like, I don't even think while they were recording this album, like, a lot of them weren't speaking, and, like, the money was bad. Dr. Dre, I think, had already left Ruthless Records by the time the album actually came out. He just finished it to fulfill a contractual obligation, I think. But that being said, there is like the beats on this album are incredible. And so I didn't know any of the politics about it when I found it. I think, I'm going to say in 1992, I started listening to this album. So it was already old hat. Ice Cube was well on his way with his solo career, and actually the NWA guys had already started in their solo ventures. But This album is the start of that Dr. Dre sound, that G-funk heavy synthesizer, real slow down gangster, really deep bass, like deep bass, high synthesizer, a really nice combination where everything on the East Coast back then was very jazz influenced and like a lot of crispy snares and like kind of quicker drum tracks. A lot of it was past the era of the James Brown sample, but everything was still pretty jazzy and dancy in '91. And NWA just slowed the tempo right down, and they got, I mean, they got real gangster with it. And where Straight Outta Compton, they talked the talk, but it just seems to me that on this album, like the beats followed. The production was so much higher. The beats were just so much better. They you can tell Dr. Dre found like a good studio. He was actually very much invested in the craft of music production, and it's like it sounds like no other album. Maybe The Chronic would be the only exception that I could say, which came after this. But like this was the precursor, and like specifically Always Into Something. That was the start of that era to me. And it started in '91. People think it was like nothing but a G thing, but to me, it started a year earlier with this. And I've always loved this album. It's a bit, now that I'm a grown man, closer to 50 than 40, I can very much compartmentalize the awful misogyny, violent nature of a lot of the things that are being said in this record. I can put that in the back of my mind and still enjoy it from the perspective of the 15-year-old child that I was when I found it. But anyway, just a masterful work of production. And the lyrics are full of piss and vinegar, which is something that any 15-year-old boy would absolutely love. And although I didn't exactly, I lived in the suburbs, I most definitely identified with like I didn't think I was black, but I identified with the struggle and the anger that these guys felt about just being mistreated and misrepresented. And I don't know, I felt a bit of a kinship with these guys, or I felt, things weren't great. That was at 15 years old, life was about as bad as it could possibly get for me. And I just identified with the anger and the angst, and just identified with what they were talking about. Anyways, so NWA, thank you very much. Dr. Dre, MC Ren. Easy E wasn't the greatest rapper ever, but man, those guys did the business.
Got some killer
Still my
samples.
favorite rapper to this day.
Yeah, some great
Number
samples.
3, Pearl Jam 10.
Okay.
Now, it didn't hurt that I just read a book called The Long Road about Pearl Jam, so I'm like really heavy into Pearl Jam right now. But like same thing, it is a masterful album. It no duds, like 11 songs. You could maybe argue it wasn't, or I mean, I guess I could listen to an argument where people would say, well, it's not as impactful as, Nevermind, or, but I don't particularly care about those arguments. And quite frankly, I like Pearl Jam much more than Nirvana, even though they weren't as influential. There was an earnest, there was a conviction to what they were singing about. It's like Eddie Vedder had to get these songs out of him or he would burst. Really powerful vocals, great guitar playing. It really didn't hurt that those guys were in Mother Love Bone before and had like we're talking talented musicians that all came together from different areas. The rhythm section was already well established. I think Mike McCready came from like a bit of a kind of a punk, the punk LA scene. But anyways, seasoned guitar player. All these the rhythm section was well tuned, and Ed had played in bands, since the late '80s. And man, they just came together. They were on fire. It seems like they couldn't do any wrong in these days, and everything they touched just was so huge. And I can remember their videos on Much Music, and like just seeing the footage of Eddie Vedder climbing like the scaffolding and stuff. And I have fond memories of the visuals of these guys. I mean, they I don't really know what else I can say about it. It's a very influential album for me. Again, back when 10 came out, I was still pretty heavy into hip hop. In fact, that's really when 10 came out, I was really just starting to really love hip hop. But going back, this album is what started it all for Pearl Jam. One of the greatest bands that ever did it. They're the last band still standing. Um, whether you like him or not, I mean, I guess I have a friend who hates Eddie Vedder's voice. Sure, I guess it could be considered an acquired taste, but I find his vocals to be uplifting, and he certainly can belt it out with the absolute best of them. Um, and I think just when he met those guys from that other band, like it was magic, and they knew it right away. And even the record label knew it right away. It seems like everybody involved with this knew that they had lightning in a bottle. Um, and I just don't think that happens very often. I mean, you could even argue too, oh, they were in the right place at the right time, and Nirvana started it, and this and that. But to me, uh, this album still stands on its own 2 feet very, very solidly. I don't find that it has aged poorly. Um, to be honest, if there's anything that I think has aged poorly, it's the nihilistic view of the grunge rockers about better to burn out than fade away. I think that view has not aged well. Whereas I think, mind you, Pearl Jam haven't made an even flow in 20 years, or 30 for that matter. But, I still appreciate them, and I would follow them blindly. I would buy any Pearl Jam album that ever comes out, just because there's always going to be something good on it. But again, this is where it started right here. They don't even really need a greatest hits, to be honest. 10 is their greatest hits, and I like Versus just as much. But you know what I mean. You put those two albums up. That's there. You got their greatest hits right there. That is a comprehensive list of 91 for me, Jimmy. What
Cool.
say you?
Yeah. This year was really special for me because this is when I really committed to music and just realized that I had to do music for the rest of my life, for better or for worse. I guess the word that you said at the beginning, I think sums up this year nice, is fresh. I think this was a very creatively fertile year where almost anything worked as long as it wasn't mainstream 80s rock. You could do whatever you wanted, right? It was which to be fair, I think the 80s was getting a little stale, and the 90s was just this incredible, fresh, creative. Everything sounded different. The name of the game was to experiment, and a lot of the underground bands that had gained a lot of steam in the 80s but didn't really get the recognition that they deserved started to pop up. This was tough for me too. It was difficult because there's so many important records. So I guess I'm going to try to go in an order, although this order could change at any time. So the first album is from a band that has faded from most people's memories, unfortunately. Now, I had an interesting experience. I was at a Christmas party with my parents, and it was a friend of my dad's. And the friend of my dad's, his son came to the party a little bit later, and he was the guitar player for this. and he looked like a rock star. I think I was like 9 or 10 years old, but I remember being taken aback by this guy, and he said, we were asking him what he's doing, and he's like, I'm touring with my band in the States, and we're working really hard, and we just got a record deal. And yeah, I just remember that from that Christmas party, and then I think a year or two later, his band was all over the radio, and I remember my dad's friends were really excited about it, and yeah, so the band is Spin Doctors.
Wow.
Yeah, and the song that was all over the radio was Two Princes. I think a lot of people would still recognize that song. But yeah, the album is fantastic, and it's a whole mix of different styles. And I remember just from the circumstances of me getting into the band, I learned every song off this album on the guitar. I memorized every single lick on this thing. So it's really important to me, and I think I wouldn't say it's underrated because it did get a lot of attention at the time. And the band didn't really do a whole lot after this. I think they did a sophomore record. I think the band sort of, a few members left. So, I mean, as most bands kind of do, the core kind of fell apart. But I think it's a brilliant record. And at least for me, it's definitely in my top 3 because it really shaped me as a guitar player, and it really got me into the different types of guitar playing, and there's a lot of funk on this record. There's a lot of rock and roll. There's a lot of blues. It's kind of like everything is on this record, and each member is very distinct. But yeah, so that's my number 3. And another band, obviously, that was a lot bigger and very, very important, and still very important today. Similar style of music. I'm going to go with the Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, as my number 2. For the same reason as this album, I was just really into Flea's bass playing and John's guitar playing. I learned every single note on guitar and bass on this record as well. I was in a band in high school. We covered almost every song off this record. So yeah, extremely important album. And I remember just being really blown away by the artwork. It's like, what is that? What's going on there? Just really interesting. And then if you open up the album cover, you got all the members with their tattoos. It's like
Jimmy, nothing is more 90s than tribal tattoos, is it not?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was just so different, and yeah. I mean, I guess as a kid, it looks a little scary. Like these guys looked a little too ahead. Like I had trouble kind of mentally trying to grasp what I was looking at, but and yeah, they seemed to be very liberal, like a lot of sexual innuendos in their music, and I guess that was a little scary for me too. But the music, I mean, you can't really deny how incredible the music was, and just I have to say, like, the production on this thing is unbelievable. I mean, it's so it's Brendan O'Brien, who
really,
yeah, and Rick Rubin produced it. So
I thought it was good.
Yeah, so it was Rick Rubin.
Brendan O'Brien was the engineer, Jimmy?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so Rick Rubin produced it, but Brendan O'Brien was the engineer. But, like, the two of them, like, it was a team, right? It was an incredibly important team. And I think they recorded this in a mansion in LA. This abandoned mansion. Well, it wasn't abandoned, but it was this... It's cool that when you can, when a lot of bands, when they record records in homes as opposed to studios, like I know Led Zeppelin did that a lot, where they would find these cool like cottages in Britain, and then just bring in like a mobile truck, and kind of adds vibe, right? If you find a really vibey home, and then you can kind of, like manipulate the sound of the rooms with like baffles and stuff. It's really cool. And this album definitely has a distinct character that I can't really compare to any other record. The band never did anything that sounded like this again. Nothing before this record sounded like this. This was a one-of-a-kind record. Yeah, just Amazing. So that's my number two. And my number one, I don't have a CD of this, but I have a tape. And I still have the tape. So we're going back kind of your last pick. It was a Seattle band. But I'm going to go with Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger record as my favorite album from 91 from those guys. Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains didn't have an album in 91, but yeah, between those three, this is definitely my personal favorite.
Wow.
You know, produced by Terry Date. Yeah, just it's just very creative. Kim Thale is such an interesting guitar player. I would say Soundgarden's probably the heaviest band of the big grunge four. If you're saying Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden, I feel like these guys are definitely the heaviest. Definitely.
It's a bold statement, Jimmy. Heavier than Alice in Chains?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so for sure.
Bold statement, sir.
Yep. You know, they're influenced by the Melvins. Was another band from that Seattle kind of era that really they down-tuned their guitars, and you could really say that was grunge, right? Like really low-tuned guitars, kind of sludgy, almost Black Sabbath-y, you know, kind of stoner rock. So that's sort of where these guys are more positioned than the other three bands. So that for me, that's what gives them that heaviness, is that sort of stoner rock, Melvin-y, detuned thing. And yeah, it's all over this record. And yeah, just go through them. Rusty Cage, you know, his guitar is tuned down to B, which is really low, but it's in unison with the bass. I mean, it sounds so cool. Slaves and Bulldozers, Outshine, of course, Jesus Christ Pose, Face Pollution. I mean, I love all these tunes. Somewhere, Searching with My Good Eye Closed, that's really heavy song. Room 1,000 Years Wide. There's also like a lot of saxophone on this album too, which is wild. And it's it's doing like this really kind of crazy postmodern soloing. So it almost sounds like it's like a modern jazz band at some points, right? So really creative. You don't hear a lot of bands doing like weird modern sax playing.
Not since the 80s anyway, Jimmy.
Yeah, but you don't hear any of this sax in the 80s though. It's really disturbing, weird sax. Mind Riot is a really cool song. I just learned that a few months ago, actually. I can't believe I didn't learn it earlier, but it's like every string on the guitar is tuned to one note. It's tuned to E. So that's why like you get a lot of this kind of almost like Eastern you know, kind of sitar-y almost sounding music from Kim, right? Just because of all those weird tunings that drone, right? So there's a lot of that vibe throughout this record too. I also love Super Unknown as well. It's a toss-up between which album I think is better. I think this album was again, it's kind of like Blood Sugar Sex Magic. It's like it's such a unique record. Like nothing sounds like it. And the band never sounded like this again either. You know, it's and I think that's what's special about 1991. It was this kind of transition year where it wasn't really the 90s yet. It was still, you know, you could look at the styles. It still looked a little like 80s with some bands, and you know, but it's that magical crossover point. I think that just and I mean, and also CDs were kind of becoming the trendy thing to buy, right? Like records and tapes were starting to kind of go out. And so
I think it was 91 was the year actually when CDs became the dominant form of the dominant media. It was 1991.
Yeah. So,
or maybe it was 92, but anyways, 91, 92, who gives a shit? It's the same.
Yeah. And I remember it was a tough transition for me as a kid. I mean, cause I was so used to buying tapes for so many years. Right. And then, but I couldn't deny how cool a CD was, right? It was also it sound better.
We were poor, right, as kids. Like, I mean, I'm only a few years older than you, but I remember like tapes were still cheaper. Tapes were $10.99 and CDs were minimum $16.99, but sometimes they were $19.99. And like, you know, $9 is a big deal when you're 13. You know what I mean? And in 91, I was 14 years old. And like, I didn't even have CDs in 91 for that matter. It wasn't until 94, I think, that I could make that leap.
Hmm.
I was still firmly, and even I think I was even buying LPs still.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yep. Well, that's why you would go to secondhand stores back in the day. I used to always buy like everything secondhand. I mean, I guess unless it was a really important release, you had to have it, right? I mean, sure,
even still in 91, Jimmy, though, there were far less secondhand music stores than there were. You get to 96, sure, everywhere. But
yeah.
like in the burbs, I mean, I grew up in 91, we moved to Mississauga, and there were none in Mississauga. Like I sure didn't know where they were. In 93, I started going downtown, and then I discovered used music stores. And they were usually like flea markets and stuff like that, which was a godsend because you could use sometimes you could get two for the price of one new one.
Hmm.
But you know what I mean? You had to figure in the cost of getting downtown and this and that. But yeah, no, I definitely the demise of the cassette was
It was a sad
was tough for me as well. But rightly so. I mean, cassettes were so shitty. Like, let's be honest, man, they sounded like shit,
yeah,
right? They were records sounded good. The only good thing about a cassette was that they could be portable, and then once
it was
the
portable.
CD became portable, and there were portable players. The writing was on the wall for the cassette. It was finished,
Yeah.
and
So we'll, I mean, just for fun, I mean, guess some honorable mentions, maybe.
sure.
I mean, clearly the Guns N' Roses albums, right? Be Use Your.
Wow.
It didn't make
the
either one of
demise
our
of the
lists,
80s the demise of the 80s was certainly assured with Nevermind, but I'll tell you, Guns N' Roses took one last huge stab at it.
yeah.
And another thing I do remember about the Guns N' Roses is I remember 100% that. So like I started high school in 91, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was your old rockers, but when Guns N' Roses came out in November, I remember the celebration, the universal celebration from all the rockers in school about the new Guns N' Roses record.
Yeah.
And then when Nirvana and Pearl Jam hit at the beginning of 92, when it started to gain traction on the radio and on Much Music, there was about, it seemed to me that half the rockers were like, this sucks, I like Warrant. And half of them were like, this is rock and roll, but I still like, I still like Iron Maiden better, or I still like Metallica better. Metallica, oh my god, 91.
That was a
But
massive record. Yeah, that was huge. That was huge.
there were, I can certainly remember that Guns N' Roses, like that was, it was over for 80s music, but Guns N' Roses had a pretty good life with Use Your Illusion, like massive, massive tour. They still got a lot of airplay on Much Music, and they went out swinging. And maybe if it weren't for that awful Spaghetti album, maybe they wouldn't have, maybe they wouldn't have seen such a heavy demise, because there was clearly an appetite for their music still.
Yep.
Huge appetite for Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden and all that, and Alice in Chains. But like Guns N' Roses weren't gone. Def Leppard was gone, and Bon Jovi. I certainly don't remember anybody liking Bon Jovi past that point, even though clearly people did from those sales figures you told us about last time.
Yeah, they were almost bigger in the '90s than they were in the '80s, which is crazy.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
But honorable mention to Metallica, Black Album. Woo!
Yeah, I mean, that was close to the list. For me, a lot of the ballads on that record, I found I got a little bored with. Even though those were the big ones for that album, some good rock albums though. There was Van Halen's "Fuck" for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was a good record. David Lee Roth's "A Little Ain't Enough" was great. I love that record too. Didn't get any attention though, but that was a great record. What else? There was Skid Row's Slave to the Grind was good. So there was still a lot of really good rock albums coming out. They were kind of more in the sort of the post '80s kind of vibe, right? Mr. Big had their second record come out too.
The Cult, I think, had Ceremony,
Cult,
which
yeah. Cult.
wasn't Sonic Temple by any means, but still, it had some good stuff on it, and it was still, the Cult weren't over at that point. They were, they were still holding on.
Yeah. REM, massive record.
Oh yeah, wow! I think that was a huge one that we forgot. With the Automatic for the People, I think.
No, Out of Time.
Out of Time, yeah. To be honest, Jimmy, I wasn't a huge REM fan, but I definitely know that they have legions of fans, and they've made enough music that is memorable to where they definitely can't be forgotten, even from somebody who only listened to them casually, like me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Ozzy had a great record too. No More Tears was a great record.
Yes.
Great rock album. I mean, can't really think of any more. I mean, of course, Nirvana's Nevermind is probably the most important album of that year.
I feel it only fair to mention too. I mentioned that NWA album, but although technically I think when people refer to the golden era of hip hop, they consider it in kind of a broad sense. It would be 87 or maybe 86 to 97, 98. But truly, to me, the golden era is, I would have to say 91 and onward. 91, it's almost, I mean, there were great things in 90, like Fear of a Black Planet. And there were more of them in 92, I think, if memory serves me correct. But 91, certainly, it seemed to me that it was the time when hip hop was becoming less of a fad. And it's almost like it wasn't a lot of like major labels investing in it. It was little labels that were starting up. And either major labels were taking notice and making these smaller labels subsidiaries and distributing for them, or they were outright signing their own acts, and they were like, it almost seemed like these labels needed to have a hip hop department now, because they were starting to make enough money where people weren't getting signed for single deals and stuff like that. And you actually had bands like Public Enemy that were touring the world, and they were putting in good sales figures, and LL Cool J and Beastie Boys, and you had big acts that were making big money. Eric B and Rakim, and 91 is significant for Pete Rock and CL's debut EP, All Sold Out, which was just the beginning. I mean, they only did 2 albums, but the All Sold Out EP was fantastic, and definitely a good debut from them.
Okay, so another 2 honorable mentions. Lenny Kravitz had a great record. It was his sophomore record.
Wait a minute, we're talking Lenny Kravitz or Romeo Blue? You're right, it was Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah, Lenny Kravitz. Yeah, and I had another one. Oh, what was it? Yeah, Mama Said. That's a great album. And that single Mama Said has a. Or was it Always on the Run? Yeah, it was Always on. Really so like Always on the Run was the hit single, and it had a guitar solo from Slash. That was pretty cool.
Really? Yeah. Well, Mama Said was a big one too from that album. I remember them both being about equally big, as as a 14-year-old lad. In my memory, they were both about equal. And you're right, I do remember that record. And I do remember how black guy with massive dreadlocks, like, yeah, that was kind of way out of left field. And the woman drummer too, I remember. Yeah, she could tear it up.
Yeah. So this is what's confusing. So the song is called Always on the Run. That's the song that has Mama Said. He sang like as the main hook. but it's actually called
Uh,
Always on the Run. But the album is called Mama Said, which is very confusing. But
uh,
yeah, and Primus, Sailing the Seas of Cheese. It's kind of a fun band.
I'm not gonna lie, Jimmy. Besides the Metallica, there's not a lot, and the Pete Rock and CL. To me, there's not a lot that I. Oh, Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory.
Okay.
In terms of hip hop, again, really really big one right there with Scenario. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the Beastie Boys were the hip hop group that you know all the frat guys and the jocks kind of liked because they were funny and they talked about fighting for your right and this and that. And but like Tribe were the serious group that like I remember in high school, Tribe was the one group that united, that everyone liked. If you didn't like hip hop, you still didn't like Tribe Called Quest in '91. But like the skaters liked them, the stoners liked Tribe Called Quest, the hardcore hip hoppers liked Tribe Called Quest. The guys that liked, the West Coast hip hop NWA sound that was very far removed from the East Coast, they liked Tribe Called Quest. They were universally respected, which wasn't, hip hop was pretty divisive still in those days. It was a East Coast West Coast thing,
Mm-hmm.
but Tribe had the respect of everybody, and certainly Scenario was the one song that I remember being really huge for. It was all over Much Music, and that was Leaders of the New School and Tribe. One of the first really big posse cuts, which wasn't something that they did a lot in rock. Like you just said, Always on the Run had Slash doing the solo, but like normally rock bands stuck to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But in hip hop, you would get groups and they would like come together and they would be on each other's songs. And Scenario was the first one like that I remember hearing, where it was like two big groups that were together. And both those groups, Tribe had two rappers and Leaders of the New School had four. There were six guys rapping on that one song. So big
Mm-hmm.
deal for me. Tribe, Low End Theory, one of the best albums ever too. Honorable mention.
Okay, cool. I used to love the Stevie Ray Vaughan album, "The Sky Is Crying." That's a great record. Uh, his last release. Well, I think he died the year before, but that was sort of a posthumous release there. The Pixies had a record. Uh, Genesis, "We Can't Dance." Wasn't a huge fan of that, but that "We Can't Dance" song was all over the radio.
Awful video.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, man, they really can't dance.
Yeah, Queen had their last record. Well, their last record with Freddie, called Innuendo.
Mm.
Uh,
Didn't Freddie die that year too? 91.
yeah. So yeah, that's yeah, that was. I actually remember what the like when that happened. I remember seeing that on TV. That was pretty sad.
I do remember too.
Yeah,
George Michael killed it.
yeah. "Diamonds and Pearls" by Prince. Not a great record. I'm not crazy about that record. The '90s wasn't so great for Prince, but yeah, I think that's all I got. Oh, "Temple of the Dog." That was a big one.
Oh, big one. Yeah. You know what? I actually just bought that last week too, after reminding myself how much I love Pearl Jam. My
Yep.
God, what a solid record that was.
Yep.
Those guys had so many hits back then. They're just like, fuck it, we'll make this throwaway album.
Yeah.
A throwaway album
Yeah.
was that big.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I did read, because in that Long Road book, they said, so they give a lot of credit to Chris Cornell. So when Eddie Vedder came on the scene, things were poised for them to. Everyone knew it was magic right away, and some of the other bands, especially Nirvana, were pretty. They were pretty, or not Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. Let's be honest, it was all him.
Mm-hmm.
Kurt Cobain was kind of disparaging towards Eddie Vedder, but Chris Cornell was very much kind and warm. And when the Temple of the Dog was just like a throwaway. Chris Cornell wrote some songs. He's like, "Hey guys, like let's do this in honor of Andy." And then he invited Eddie Vedder to sing on it because he like, so Pearl Jam had already formed. I don't think they were Mookie Blaylock then, but anyway, he knew they were a band, and he did it just out of the goodness of his own heart. Like, you know what, this would be good if this guy sings with me. I know it'll be good. And they actually edited the video. Like it came out once Pearl Jam took off, and they wanted to showcase the Temple of the Dog video a little more. They re-edited the video to give Eddie Vedder a more prominent, you know what I mean, more prominent stature in that song, and it worked. Obviously, it sold more. But Chris Cornell was very gracious about it. Chris Cornell like really didn't give a shit. He wasn't like, no, it's my record, and you know these are my songs, and it really was a sense of community, which was really nice. And Chris Cornell and Eddie Vedder were always were friends pretty much from the get go. And Chris Cornell being essentially the like, because they were the first ones to have an album out of that scene. He could have been the biggest dick of all, but he wasn't. He was a very good natured guy, very friendly, and he truly did believe in the sense of community in Seattle, and really made Ed feel comfortable, which is something that not a lot of other people did. So anyway, good for you, Chris Cornell. Rest in peace. One more thing, I actually, when I was shopping for records, like I do every Friday, Bad Motorfinger, I passed it up at the record store.
Pass it up. Wow.
But I did pay $190 for a Morrissey record, so wow. I couldn't buy two of them. But you know, I'm going to check out Bad Motorfinger next.
Fair enough. Two other really important records. They weren't studio albums, but Neil Young had a live record called Weld that was huge. Kind of reestablished Rockin' in the Free World and Hey Hey My My. And Motley Crue had Decadent Decadence. I remember we talked about that record. Fantastic.
Yeah, good greatest hits.
Yeah, fantastic greatest hits.
Yeah. And Primal Scream, I think, is their best song ever.
I don't disagree with you. That's a great song. Yeah.
I thought Primal Scream was good because I didn't buy a lot of greatest hits back then. I didn't know a lot of bands that had greatest hits. However, it seemed to me like that was the start of when bands do a greatest hits, they throw a new track on it to make you want to buy it, even though you have all the other albums. Yep. And a lot of times I thought, like, or in retrospect, looking back, a lot of the times that's a bit of a, you know what I mean? It's a bit of a cash grab, but Motley Crue did it right. Even though Motley Crue were no strangers to cash grabs, definitely throwing Primal Scream on your greatest hits it was a greatest hit, a brand new greatest hit that they put on a greatest hit. So it worked. Just like Mary Jane's Last Dance was on Tom Petty's greatest hits. It was a new track that they put on that actually did become one of their greatest hits. It sat nicely with all those other songs on that album. It deserves a placement. And it's not just something that they threw on or like an excuse for you to buy the record. It really does have a place there. And honorable mention to Motley Crue. Motley Crue didn't really give you value a lot of the time, shall we say. It's a bit of a spotty career going on with the Crue, especially nowadays.
Yeah. Well, it's the like Theater of Pain and Girls, Girls, Girls are typically not thought of as great records. And that was at the height of their career too, which is a little strange, but yeah, they definitely, were able to maintain a solid career. I mean, they're probably still one of the most popular hair metal bands that I can think of, really.
Yeah, they have a big live following. And it's from personal experience, I can say too that, if you love backing tracks like the Crue, they have mastered that. So I would definitely recommend going to see a Motley Crue show because. My God, Vince, he hasn't lost a thing. I mean, his vocals still sound great.
Yeah, some of the brief little TikTok clips that pop up on my phone of Vince trying to sing are pretty bizarre.
I saw a clip of Motley Crue playing, whether it was last year or the year before, Nicky's playing like this, and then he goes like this. And the bass is still playing. And he just gets right back into it. It's so fake.
Yeah.
If we're on the subject of Motley Crue, shame on you guys for ditching Mick Mars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's despicable. That new guy, the new guy's probably got mad skills, but you know what? It's just, you guys don't need any fucking money. Like Mick was there from day one. And the only guy in that band, truly, obviously he probably got used to the good life, but Mick Mars truly just loves to play. And I find it despicable that it, like, in terms of like, the money gets in the way, and the one guy that just really wants to play is the one guy that they kicked out of the band. I mean, have some fucking respect.
Yeah.
Anyway, shame on you, Vince. Why don't you do a push-up or something like that?
Yeah, I didn't like how that band, like announced their retirement, several years ago, and then they came back. That really bugs me. It's like if you're gonna have a farewell tour and you're gonna announce that you're finished, if you want to regroup as a different band, that's fine. But yeah, it's not very honest to do stuff.
It screamed of it reeked of of a cash grab. Really, it's like, we're gonna do this. They had no they had no desire to pack it up. I'm sure they did it because they're like, hey, I got this great idea, Vince. Why don't we tell everyone we're gonna shut her down, go on one big massive tour, and then we're gonna wait 2 years, and we're gonna put it a greatest hits with a new song on it, and then we're gonna,
Yeah, I don't like stuff like
it's
that.
marketing and PR. And Motley Crue, to me, were like, it's almost like they're betraying the ethos of what they started out doing, which was just, they're playing the corporate game now, and they were about anti-establishment back in the day. And I don't know, it's a lot of false pretenses going on there. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Right, Jeff, that was a good one. So we got our three favorite albums from 1991. Just to recap, so Jeff had Achtung Baby, NWA's second record, which I won't say, and 10, Pearl Jam's 10.
Mm-hmm.
I had Spin Doctors, Pocket Full of Kryptonite, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. So yeah, I'm gonna probably check out the NWA album. I was looking at the sample list; it looks pretty incredible what they were sampling. All pretty amazing songs. That's a lot of.
I still think the production on that album is amongst the best beats on any hip hop record ever. And just like I said, the sound of it is leaps and bounds above. I mean, it's almost like, I don't think at that point hip hop was being produced in like really, really good studios, but Dre like took it to the next level. Like Dr. Dre recorded that album in a good studio for sure, because everything sounds crisp and tight, and there's lots of space between all the sounds, or the instrumentation or samples, or I guess whatever you want to call it. But everything has got its space. Nothing sounds dusty or dingy or out of place, and even for a band that was falling apart, Dre still made it work. And like, I think the band broke up right there and then, and it still sold 1 million copies immediately. So
I'll check it out.
Anyway, Jimmy, I look forward to hearing from you next week.
Okay, sounds good.